Hello, welcome back. It's uh, the it's a situation here we find ourselves in. So the time now, where I am is it's about half an hour until it turns into the 15th of May of 2024, which will mean that the Kharkov operation will have entered its fifth day. Russia's northern Kharkov offensive is something of a quandary to me that I really thought I wouldn't see. The Russians have simultaneously, in the course of 5 days, done what the Ukrainian command was incapable of doing over the course of roughly 4 to 5 months last summer. Now, for those of you who are living under a rock or just don't follow the war simply, Russia has launched its northern prong offensive. This has been hallmarked for some time. It's been known that the Russians have been building forces on the front for some time, and they've now unleashed those attacks. There are three maps here that I have brought up. Two of them are pro-Ukrainian, those being this map by Deep State, this map which is put together by the OSINT, or Project Owl, which is a pro-Ukrainian source, and Calibrated's pro-Russian map. The reason why I picked these three is give a good spread, and at the same time, Deep State tends to be quite reliable. Owl tends to be less reliable, as I find, in terms of actual placement, but their unit designation is fantastically good for identifying which units are involved. So anyway, we're going to get into this. So the Russian offensive has quite clearly borne a substantial amount of fruit. We know from this fact that elements of the 44th Army Corps and elements of the 11th Army Corps are involved in this operation. These are all the units that are involved as far as we're aware. We know that attacking towards the Lipsy direction, units of the 18th Motor Rifle Division are taking part, though they're not all from the 18th Motor Rifle Division. Elements of the 9th Motor Rifle Regiment, the 7th Motor Rifle Regiment, the 79th Motor Rifle Regiment, and the 217th Airborne Regiment are actively taking part in operations and have captured a vast swath of villages just north of Lipsky on the road to North Kharkov, or Kharkiv. In this direction, which we're classifying as the Volkansk direction, operations are mostly a case of tie down. In this direction, we have elements of the 1st MRR. We have the 153rd Tank Regiment, which is subordinate itself to the 47th Motor Rifle Division, and the 11th Tank Regiment, as well as supporting elements from the territorial 1009th MRR. There are other regiments in the rear which we haven't accommodated for, and this is something that I want to get into early on. So these include things like the 72nd Motor Rifle Division, which does have armoured elements to it. You have territorial, the 41st Motor Rifle Regiment, which for some reason has been put on here twice. There's also the 2nd Spetsnaz Brigade. There is the 1856th Motor Rifle Regiment, and there is the 138th Motor Rifle Brigade. The point I would like to make from this very early on is that we can see a substantial number of Russian units here, but not a huge overcommitment of forces, and this is something which has been noted by a lot of both pro-Russian and pro-Ukrainian sources. The indication is that these are not substantial hits. These are simply recon by fire missions which have found a substantial amount of success. Now, the reason for the Russian success is not just down to new tactics and the fact that they have a large amount of supremacy in this area. The Ukrainians in the area are horribly undermanned. Lipsy, for example, is defended by the 42nd Mechanized Brigade, which is already running on very, very, very limited amounts of equipment. This unit was actively withdrawn from operations in the Donets because of casualties. You have the 215th Battalion of the 125th Territorial Defence Brigade, which has been thrown in around this area to support. The far side of this forested area, on the other side of the Lipsy, there is the 113th Territorial Brigade, which is actively fighting battles here around Zhirivla. I'm not going to try and pronounce that again. They in turn are supported by Omega 2, which is a primarily UAV unit. The Volkansk direction is the more immediate problem for the Ukrainians, however. Lipsy, while Lipsy will fall, and it will fall, the Russians simply just have too much. I mean, their reserves include the 93rd Mechanized Brigade Battalion. So that's just a battalion. That is a single battalion that they've drawn up in reserve. It will not hold. As well as a single battalion of the 105th Territorial Defence Brigade. So there's at least some reserves in this area, though. The Volkansk front is bloody drawn as bare as you can get. It is thinly stretched. There are elements of the UAV Peaky Blinders or Hostry Karsurki unit, which around Iviansky, though from the most recent reports this evening, it's indicated that they have given up this position and are falling back. The same is also apparently true of the Vivdar SSO, who have also apparently either tried to get across the river or have hauled their backside south as quickly as possible. Volkansk itself has mostly been abandoned by the Ukrainians. Ukrainian forces in the town, did include the 57th Motorized Brigade Battalion, a single battalion which has since withdrawn, while a single battalion from the 92nd Assault Brigade was also in the area. The main defenders are the Russian Volunteer Corps. Footage of them fighting has been identified. However, it is now also established that they are losing ground at a rate which they simply cannot sustain. You have to remember, this title here of the Volunteer Corps, okay, that is highly misleading. Highly misleading. If you can see from the unit identification, you can see that there are these two little dashes just above the unit icon. Conveniently, this battalion of the 57th Motorized Brigade also has two dashes. It's only a battalion level in strength, and it will most likely not be wholly organised effectively. It will most likely just be patched together from whatever pro-Russian units pro-Ukrainian Russian forces will fight. Besides that, the reserves at the moment are the 125th Territorial Defence Brigade, which, as we've already stated, is already fighting a battle near Lipsy, so most likely will not be able to commit a whole number of units. The 215th Battalion, I'm not going to try and pronounce that, of the 1st Ivan Bon Brigade, they might be withdrawn, though apparently they are coming under considerable attack themselves. And then your next options is to basically tear units off the eastern side. Well, I'm going to get into the fact that the 1st Guards Tank Army is just casually waiting there for the Ukrainians to do something silly. Now, obviously, in the last couple of days, the idea of Sumny becoming a new front has begun to pick up more and more. As of now, we only know about 2 territorial motor rifle regiments which are around the Sumny region. I don't believe that Sumny is a legitimate target. I believe that the Russians are going to throw absolutely everything into this offensive. And I will now just explain why. This is the very pro-Russian map. This is the pro-Russian map around their Kharkov front. Now, the reason why I am listing a pro-Russian source here is because despite the fact that the pro-Russian sources tend to overwhelmingly exaggerate the success of their offensives, on this occasion, they've actually been correct. Okay, on this occasion, they have been quite remarkably correct. You look at other fronts, Luganski has apparently not been taken. According to a Ukrainian source, this was counterattacked early on the morning of the 14th and was retaken. That is in fact not the case. It has not been retaken. Not does only does this map agree with me on that. I think you'll find that Deep State UA also agrees with me on this one. Well, not with me. It agrees with the pro-Russian sources. The Ukrainians have given up this town and they're now attempting to fall back to Lipsy to try and hold this front. Which is why I'm more sort of using this pro-Russian source as it's a bit more accurate. Granted, this map is absolutely brilliant for us trying to identify what units are currently there with what we've got, the knowledge that we have available. But these two are far better for actually assessing the success of Russian forces. So we'll start with the very pro-Russian map. Now, the pro-Russian map indicates that the Russians have pushed all the way to the Setsky Donets River, which is a really significant impact. This now means that this river, bearing in mind that this bridge, the Stavi Slovots Dam, that has been blown up. It was blown up on the 11th. That is the last major bridge over the Donets River until you get to around here. Yeah, that's sort of the issue you're looking at. This means that if the Ukrainians now want to try and with the pinning of them, with the Russian forces having pushed to the Donets River here, this now means that the only way the Ukrainians can support operations on the far side of the river, on the far side of the Donets River from Kharkov, is by driving round or peeling forces off from the eastern territories. But more importantly, it makes it a lot harder to try and get units across the other side of the river to reinforce the Kharkov front. This is why I believe that this operation has actually been extremely well thought out by the Russian High Command. This entire operation, whether it's a diversion, a full frontal assault, doesn't matter. The loss of that bridge now means that the Ukrainians will have to basically they won't have the ability to react as quickly to Russian movements in this general area. If the Russians make a big push for Lipsy, or they just completely ignore Lipsy, go by to Ternova and then push south and try and assault Kharkiv from a more sort of easterly direction, the Ukrainians are going to have to try and somehow get around the Donets River. If you're a pro-Russian, you're currently looking at moving south to Statshov and then trying to enter Kharkiv via Klinichi, as well as sending a force south. We'll say to Veliki Bakba or towards Kamyana, and then intercepting any reinforcements that try to enter via the industrial district. The destruction of this bridge and now the pinning of any Ukrainian forces on either side of this river, it basically throws the initiative almost entirely into the Russian hands. And that's a very pro-Russian source. Deep State UA has said that this is an unknown status. Bear in mind, that unknown status is 58 kilometers squared worth of territory that they know nothing about. They don't know what the situation in Volchansk is like, other than we've been told apparently in the last sort of maybe 2 to 3 hours that the Ukrainians have deemed it no longer worth their time and have withdrawn. Which means, and I'll get on to why that is significant in a minute, but they're also stating that Bruvkatak, I can't pronounce that one, sorry, Bruh has been taken, and Startutsia has also been taken. There is no longer any way to get across. There's no way to link these two fronts, except for going around the Donets River to the south. So that's your biggest issue. The other big issue is, if correct, the loss of Vovchansk. Now, why is this a big issue? Well, if you look southward, where is the next big city other than Vovchansk? It's not Billy Kodats, because you can get around that. You can bypass that north or south through the fields. Yeah, you're starting to see that there are no big cities. But why is that important? Okay, I'll explain why Vovchansk was Ukraine's single best chance at holding out. We know the Ukrainians like to turn certain positions into fortresses. We know that they turned Bakhmut, they turned Advitka, they turned them into fortresses. Having turned them into fortresses, it took the Russians months at a time to break down the defences of these particular settlements, which is why progress for the Russians has been so slow. They've had to spend their time breaking down resistance in urbanised areas. Vovchansk was the Ukraine's best option to recreate that circumstance for long enough. If they'd have fought for Vovchansk maybe for another 24 to 48 hours, there's a good chance, there's a good chance the Russian volunteer corps could have been surrounded. But there's a very good chance that they would have fought to their death anyway. They know what's coming for them. They know that they're dubbed as traitors to Russia. They're most likely going to get executed. They probably would have fought to the end. But by buying 24 to 48 hours extra, any units which would have been withdrawn off these fronts could have had more time to arrive, and it could have allowed for a more stabilised front. As it is, here you go, we have units being hit by Lancets in the rear. More AFVs have been hit in the rear, which means that most likely this battalion of the 92nd Assault Brigade is already flipping strung out as it is. All these reports coming in, vehicles being hit, and vehicles being hit and abandoned. Russian strikes on bridges, Russian hits different controlled bridges on the Belgorod region. The Russians are making it so that they can burst out of Volchansk onto the flat, open steppes of the Kharkov region, and can then run south straight into where the 1st Guards Tank Army is waiting to launch its Kupiansk offensive. This is their endgame. They see the Oski River. They see a number of bridges which are ready to blow up. We see they've targeted the bridge near Kupiansk-Volonsk. That was last month, I must be honest. If the Russians break through at Vovchansk, they will charge south in force. The 1st Guards Tank Army will launch its offensive, and you will see a desperate scramble. Look at this. Mechanized brigade, another mechanized brigade, a battalion of a mechanized brigade, another mechanized battalion, a tank brigade. Well, you've seen that, there's a 43rd Mechanized Brigade. You're seeing so many. Okay. You're seeing all these mechanized units. If they don't pull back over this river by the time this offensive gets started, that's it. They're not pulling back. They're going to have to try and fight their way off over the far side of this river. Okay? Oski River. Yes, there's a small gap which looks very marshy through here. They might be able to slip some units through. Oh, but that's only infantry. All this equipment, that gets abandoned. Now, equipment can be restocked. But could you imagine the propaganda blow that would come from this entire army group just being effectively just destroyed? No, I'm not saying that's going to happen straight up. I believe that that's what this Volchansk maneuver is. I believe that that's firstly to cut the Ukrainians across the Savetsky Donetsk River, and I also believe it's to put huge pressure on this army group for when the First Guards tank army rears its ugly head and starts fighting again. Bearing in mind, the 25th Combined Arms Army also is to the south and are also making moves against Terney, which, by the way, has also seen a large number of Ukrainian forces have to abandon their positions on this front to get back across a river. Ultimately, I see the Kharkov offensive ending with one of three most likely outcomes. Outcome number one, Russian total tactical and strategic victory. They break the lines, they lay siege to Kharkov, the Ukrainians are forced to abandon the city and are forced to withdraw. The Volchansk axis, it has a substantial breakthrough as well, which leads to the First Guards Tank Army driving the enemy out of Kupiansk and back across the river, which means that the entire northern front will effectively just merge with the eastern front. And that would be a complete tactical and strategic defeat for the Ukrainian army. Option 2 is Russian partial success. Let's be honest here, at this point, it's already been a complete tactical failure on the Ukrainian behalf. The Russians have already had a pretty substantial tactical success here. They've already captured large amounts of ground in the northern Kharkov sector, and it's not going to stabilize within the next week, as I can see. So it would be a tactical victory for Russia, which wouldn't be what they sort of wanted, but it would. But the hammering that they'll give Ukrainian forces trying to stop them will effectively mean that this is a tactical Russian victory in a sense. And I do believe that if that's also the case, if the Russians then batter the Ukrainians enough, this winter we would see a renewed push for Kharkov once reinforcements had been redeployed from other axes. The third, and I believe was probably the most unlikely situation, is that the Ukrainians halt the offensive. Somehow, some way they throw something at it. They halt the Russian axis of advance on all axes. They stop them blunt in their tracks, and somehow the Russians are just halted they're halted at the gates of Kharkov. This is the most unlikely. It would also, it would represent I would call it a tactical success. Technically, it would be a strategic success because it would mean that your second largest city hasn't fallen. Yes, it's well within artillery range now, and yes, the Russians might come at you in the winter, but it's still not quite that tactical defeat that the Russians were the tactical victory the Russians were hoping for by capturing the second largest city. This, however, does bring back to point 2, which is the Ukrainian army will be on the bones of its backside. It will be strung completely thin. There will be no more forces left to spend. And Ukraine will not be able to conduct offensive operations in 2024 or 2025. We've not even begun to talk about the rumours about other axes of attack, that being from the Kherson direction, where where movement has apparently picked up. We're not talking about the potential of a Sunni direction. I don't think the Sunni axis is going to happen, but you never know. We're not even talking about the fact that there has been a huge renewed offensive in the Donetsk front. There's been offensives outside of Bakhmut to take Kasiv Yar. We're not even talking about those offensives. Ultimately, 2024 has started off rather bleakly for Ukraine with the loss of Advitka, and it is now going to get a lot more. It's going to get a lot more difficult for them. People can claim that they need all the support they can get, give them all the material and all the equipment. Ultimately, the Ukrainian army has been sucked dry it doesn't have the manpower that it used to. All of its experienced fighters are either dead or have been parceled out into various units. Those units, like the 93rd Assault Battalion or the 93rd Assault Brigade, have lost their premier status. And ultimately, 2024, if this war runs into 2025, I cannot see how, without major foreign intervention, Ukraine wins this war. That's not me saying I'm happy for Russian to win, because I can only see that making the geopolitical situation worse. But from a purely military outlook, this war is not going to end favorably for the Ukrainians. I know this one's been a bit different. Thank you very much if you have been watching. There is also going to be a return to some more regularly scheduled things. Scripts are just about finished, so hopefully we'll get back to that. So I thank you very much for listening to my ramblings and my opinions, and have a good day. Please like and subscribe if you think I deserve it. Goodbye.